you recognize as you're listening to this conversation that you are very activated within this friend group. You're always worried about what you're going to wear. You're typing your text to them 3 or 4 times and then deleting it, putting a lot of emojis, and you are out to dinner with this friend group and you realize, oh my gosh, they've made plans to go away for the weekend 2 weeks from now, and I'm not invited with them. And you have that moment where the buzzing really starts, your face turns bright red, you feel the lump in your throat, and you immediately do what we all do, which is either just take a big slug of your margarita or excuse yourself and go cry like a child in the stall of the bathroom, or you just shove it down and pretend you don't care. In that moment, is there anything subtle or not subtle that you would recommend that somebody do, or is it easier to come back to it when you're alone so that you can be freer in how you process it? Like, what do you recommend to people who are just starting to become aware of this and tap into that?
Yes. So in We've Got This, my new book, I talk about planning in advance of situations happening. Because here's the thing, everyone. In the moment when we're activated and the shutdown starts, it's really hard in that moment to be like, okay, here's what I'm going to do. Because in that moment, we literally feel like we're going to cry or throw up, or we want to run from the building, or we want to die, like literally. And after the fact, yes, let's come back to it. But in advance of situations happening, we plan out what we will do when that difficult moment arises. So first of all, I call it scripting. There are 3 things I want to leave you with. Step 1, script. Scripting is the act of planning out in advance of a situation happening. What is it that I'm going to say in this moment when something difficult happens to me? Or let's say you're going to tell someone you're dating that you love them for the first time. And you're like, I know this is going to be hard for me. I know I'm probably going to shut down and I'll be nervous. Scripting is the act of planning out what you're going to say in advance, because what happens is we move it from conscious brain into unconscious brain. In the moment when we are activated, we're like, oh my God, I'm so nervous. It's like the words will be there. Why? Because you implanted them in your brain for future retrieval. So we always script out what we're going to say in these moments in advance, and like have myriad versions of them. I by the way, you're like, Ritu, where do you do your scripting? Like, you can do it at your desk and write it down. I do it in the shower. I do it while I'm walking down the street.
So it can be both mental or written down.
Yes. I mean, it's better. It's always better, everyone, to write things down.
Why?
Like there's a cognitive process that happens in the brain. It ties back to neuroscience that enables us to engage in better information retention. But here's the thing. If someone were to say to me, I'm not going to write it down, fine. I'd rather than you just practice it in your head, at least. Something is better than nothing. Do something, everyone. So step number 1, script. Step number 2, choose in advance. What am I going to say to myself in that situation? Like self-coaching. When the moment happens and I feel the shutdown start, what am I going to say to myself? So you choose your affirmations or mantras in advance, always in advance. And so, for example, I already modeled a few. I like to say to myself, Ritu Bhasin, stand in your power. And the reason that really works for me is because for decades, I didn't stand in my power. And I'm now all about it. I'm like, I'm standing in my power. I don't give an F what's happening around me. Or Ritu Bhasin, you've got this. I love that. Or you can do this. I'm worthy. You choose your mantra affirmation, whatever it's going to work for you in advance. The third thing we do, and this is important because let's remember the body leads, not the mind. We say to ourselves, when I get activated, what am I going to do to settle myself in my body? So for me in particular, it's breath work. And in fact, if you said to me, what's the number 1 thing I can do for my body to calm myself in any situation? It's deep belly breathing. You can just go to Dr. Google and put in deep belly breathing. I talk about belly breathing in both my books. That deep, calm breath, focusing on the exhalation in particular, because it engages the parasympathetic or the flow part of our system. The exhalations. And the reason I love breath work to calm ourselves in situations is you're breathing anyways, number 1. You might as well do it in a better, more effective, healthy, productive way. And no one can see you doing it. So if you're worried that, like I would say, like I put my hand on my heart a lot, or I'll like rub my leg. or I'll just give myself a quick like embrace. Like I'll be like, you're good, you're safe. You're telling your body you're safe. If you're like, I can't do that in front of people, I hear
Right.
that. Then just start your deep breathing. And so those three things, you have your scripts, you have your self-coaching affirmations ready to go. And you've told yourself, as soon as I feel activated, I'm going to start this body work in this situation, calm myself. The very last thing we do is we visualize. So in advance, we picture ourselves doing these three things. Why? We're implanting, let's go back to neuroscience, future patterns of behavior. And we go into situations with these tools. So that way we're ready to go. And one thing I'll mention here, because I get asked this all the time and during my interviews, Ritu, isn't it unfair that I'm the one having to deal with horrible shit, like negative hates coming my way? People are being mean, inequities like sexism, racism, homophobia. Like, why do I have to plan out in advance? And I hear that. And in fact, in social justice circles, we call this the burden of the oppressed. It's like bad things are happening to me and then I have to prepare for them. And I hear that and I honor that. And I would still say, I would rather us go into situations prepared to stand in our power. Why? Because this is what it looks like to claim belonging. And secondly, and more importantly, it feels beautiful when we come out on the other side, having used our scripts and we did what we were planning on doing. And then the very last thing I'll mention here is, because I do a lot of work on allyship too. We claim belonging for ourselves, but we also help to create belonging for others, especially in the last few years with the spotlight on, are you being an upstander or a bystander? Like when things are happening around you where you're like, that's not right, that's disrespectful, and we stand silently as we watch things happen around us. We can also plan in advance for those situations. We plan out what we're going to say the next time we hear something inappropriate.
Mm-hmm.
This is what I'm going to say to myself. Oh, I shouldn't say it. It's a stranger. I can't say that to my family member at Sunday dinner because they're going to hate me. And then I'll be like, no, here's what I'm going to say to myself when I start to shut down. Here's how I'm going to calm my body. We picture the visualization of it so that we can help to do this so that other people at the table who are rightfully shut down because of inappropriate things being said, we can be an ally by using the same 3 steps. So these are the 3 must-dos in advance of situations.
I love this. And just so everyone listening understands, because I want to be sure that we're visualizing the right thing. You gave us 2 examples. The first example being you're going to tell somebody that you love them for the very first time, which is clearly a very activating moment. Even if you think they're going to say it back and respond positively, we all have that moment where we're like, oh, should I say it? Should I not say it? Is it too soon? How are they going to respond?
Yeah.
In order to stand in your power, you're saying to rehearse how you're going to be in your power, even if you say, I love you, and the person's face goes blank, and they say nothing back, and then you realize they're not going to say it back.
Yes.
And you visualize that very activating rejection.
Yes.
And by visualizing it, you are socializing your brain to be able to be powerful. And you will also know and will have rehearsed and have encoded in your subconscious how you're going to show up in that moment. And I want to be clear about something, because I know we're going to get this question. You are not manifesting the bad thing to happen. That's not what's happening, right? No. You're doing something else. So can you just explain for this example how this is different than attracting the bad thing to happen?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's kind of like decision treeing it.
Mm-hmm.
So we go into a situation knowing we're going to have a conversation with someone, and it's like, if they say this, here's what I'm going to say back. If they say, like, choose your own adventure flow. If they say this, I'm going to say this. If they say this, I'm going to say this. And so we literally decision tree out what the conversation could look like or might be. But this isn't about manifestation. Sorry. This isn't about manifesting negativity. We are always going into a situation, creating putting energy towards the outcome we want. We are always in that place where we are driving our intention and the impact to be you're having an aha.
I am having a big aha moment.
Tell me about your aha.
By rehearsing the worst case scenario and preparing to stand in your power, you are aligning with what you want most, which is the ability to express your love freely.
Precisely.
And
you nailed it. Yes.
So the second example that you gave is, though, also very important, which is training yourself to be upstanding in those moments, which means to speak up when you see something going down that is racist or that's insulting or that is discriminatory or that's just downright rude. You see somebody getting shut down. It might even be that somebody on your team is getting interrupted in a meeting.
Yeah, 100%.
What you're saying is you use this exact same strategy to also coach yourself to be more confident, visible, and vocal in those moments.
Yes, because here is the thing, and Mel, I know this is going to resonate with you, and I hope with everyone. We can't control other people's behaviors. We can never control anyone else. We can only control our own actions. And what matters more is not how someone responds to how we're behaving. What matters is that we behaved in a way that's in alignment with our truth. If someone is uncomfortable with our truth, that is on them. What we need to deeply anchor to is that I did me. I told you I loved you because that is my truth. You may not have received it in the way that I wanted you to receive it, but I am now free and liberated because I spoke my truth about how I'm feeling. And in fact, someone else's reaction and response to us saying, I love you, it's not an alignment with how we're feeling. That's not even actually about us in the end anyways. They have their own thing going on that is doing something to them that may not give them the capacity to love us back in the way we need to be loved. That doesn't matter in the end. Like, yes, it matters in the moment. It really hurts. And I'd be the first to tell you how many times have I told someone I love them or want to date them and I've been rejected. Like, the list goes on. But it doesn't matter because at the end of the day, I spoke my truth. And all of this was part of my healing and growth journey.
I think this is why the topic of authenticity is so hard for everybody to grasp, because authenticity is about you not censoring yourself. It's about you being able to show up in your full self-expression, in your full power, and not edit, censor, silence, or somehow be different because you're worried about how other people are going to react. And so in the case of in the example of telling somebody that I love you, if you are truly authentic and you're standing in your full authentic self, it would be authentic for you to tell somebody that you love them without any attachment to what they say back. Because it's not about you saying it in order to get the response. It's about you saying it because that is what's true for you.
You got it.
But in order to get to belonging, we have to go through the personal journey of authenticity first. And in your first book, you identified the 3 different versions we have of ourselves. And I love frameworks like this because they are so helpful in allowing us to locate which version of ourselves are we being right now. Yeah. And when you know which version you're being of the 3, you now have the ability to choose whether or not you're going to stay in that version or you're going to swing toward the authentic you. So can you walk us through what are the 3 versions of ourselves? And then we're going to take them one at a time.
Got it. So it's called the 3 Selves Framework. And I developed this framework based on my work and research because I was finding that people were in situations in the workplace and relationships where the surface level message was, be you. Of course I want you to be authentic. Of course I want you to bring your whole true self to this experience. But in the very next breath, it would be like, through the behavior, just kidding, don't actually be you. So it felt very complicated and confusing. It's how do I show up? So that's what led me to develop the model. We all have the three selves, and I'll take us quickly through the three selves, and then we can dig deeper into each of them.
Great.
So the most important self of all is what I call the authentic self. Your authentic self is a self where if there were no negative consequences for your actions, this is how you would show up. This is how you would speak. This is how you would dress. These are the words you'd use. This is where the content you'd share. It's where you draw a line, boundaries, yes, no, who you would love. It's the good, the bad, and the ugly of who we are. But because it's the truest reflection of our core self, it feels the best to do. So that's the authentic self. Resonating?
I love that. And I love the definition, if there were no consequences. How would you show up if there were no consequences? You're not getting arrested. You're not losing friends. You're not going to be embarrassed or ashamed by what you do. You just get to do you, and there are no consequences. That is very clear. What's the second version of ourselves?
Okay, so I'm going to go to the other side of the continuum, which is the third self, which is the performing self. So I've talked a lot today with you about the performing self. The performing self is the self that feels like we don't have a choice but to change who we are, mask aspects of our identity, cloak, hide, in order to shield from bias and judgment. It feels exhausting, humiliating, disrespectful to do, but we feel like if I don't change my accent or anglicize the pronunciation of my name or hide my experiences with anxiety, depression, or not talk about being transgender or whatever it is that we feel judged about or we feel ashamed of, we feel like we need to push it down. And of course, it feels completely disempowering and exhausting. And of course, the message coming out of today is to really take a step back and think about around whom are you performing? Like, why is that happening? What are the judgments coming your way? And most importantly, scripting, self-coaching, body-based, settle myself for those situations so we can push out of it. But that's the performing self, which I'm guessing, Mel, resonates given what we've talked about.
Well, I think that every single one of us became the performing self in middle school, and we've been doing it ever since.
100%.
And I would say until recently, I was the performing self in just about every aspect of my life. The dutiful daughter, the hard work, like whatever hat I thought I was supposed, because I felt like everything had a consequence. Everything was high stakes. So everything required me to anticipate what I needed to do and to perform as such in order to succeed or be accepted or get ahead or whatever. And so I think, I would imagine based on your research, is that where most of us spend the most of our time?
Absolutely. And for those of us who have come from cultural communities that have heightened judgment and bias coming our way, we actually spend extensive time there. We spend most of our time there, and this is the problem. But it's the adapted self, the self that lives in the middle, that we've never explored before in this way, and is a really powerful self, because when we spend time with it, what we realize is, wow, number one, I have more agency in my life than I thought I did. And when I say agency, it's just a fancy way, Mel, of saying choice and control over how I behave. So agency, choice, and control over how I behave. I have more of it than I thought I did. Number two, oh, look at that. I'm behaving more authentically than I thought I was. And which in and of itself can be so empowering, because when we realize, wow, I'm already doing this, I can do more of it. That can be very liberating. And then the third thing is that it can also be a really safe place to stay in moments and situations where we don't feel safe to be our full authentic selves, or frankly, we're exhausted. And you know what? It's Friday night, the meter's off, and I don't really feel like talking about my day job. And so I'm just going to be more adaptive in this at this cocktail party, like whatever. And so your adapted self is the self that says, all right, Ritu, I hear you. I'm going to push out of performing as much as I can after today. But I look at my authentic self, and I can't be authentic 100% of the time, because I want to keep my family. I don't want to go to jail, as you mentioned. I
Well,
want to keep my job.
yeah, I want to keep my job.
Want
What
to
I
keep my
like,
spouse.
what
Ha
I,
ha ha ha
yeah,
ha.
what I like about what you're saying is this. You're offering something that is empowering and doable and realistic.
Yes.
There are times in your life where you have to freaking perform because for some of you, you are listening to this or watching this in a part of the world where just being you could cause major harm to you because of your religion or who you love and where you live or what's going on. And so you performing a role is necessary. But what you're saying is that for so many people, that performance has been reflexive, subconscious, it's been a trap, it's become part of your identity. And what you're
Yes.
saying is that when you become aware of those areas of your life where you are performing, either because you are trying to adapt, right? You're performing consciously, strategically, because it aligns with what you want in your life, meaning you are adapting your
Yes.
true self in specific situations because it serves you, not because you feel like there's something wrong with you. You are
Yes.
the manipulator. You are the one that has something in it.
Yes.
You are the one that is deciding that it serves me to adapt my authentic self. Normally, I would pick a fight with my parents, and today I don't have the emotional energy for it. So I'm adapting to the situation consciously, strategically, which means I don't compromise who I am. I'm just being smart about where I put my energy. Is that a
You
fair yes?
you put your finger on it. So you're like ding, ding, ding. Your adapted self is a self. Few elements. Your adapted self is a self that willingly, happily chooses to adjust your behaviors to meet your needs and the needs of others. It's a choice. It's willing. It still feels good to do. It's still a manifestation of your authenticity. It meets your needs and the needs of others. And so it's still empowering to do. The difference between our adapted self and the performing self is how it feels. So the more you adapt, the more you adapt. I have the model for the three selves is on my website, rithibasine.com. You can take a look at the funnel. But the more you adapt, the more you adapt, the more you adapt, you get pushed into the performing self vortex, and your body will tell you, this does not feel good. Whereas adapting your behavior feels perfectly fine. It feels good to do. And let me give you a really quick example. I mentioned being exhausted on a Friday night. I was once at a party with my sister, and we're talking to people we had just met. And they turned to me and they said, "Oh, so Ritu, what do you do for a living?" And in that moment, I had a choice, because I knew that if I said to them, I am a belonging expert, I speak on authenticity, I'm a professional speaker, I talk a lot about diversity, equity, inclusion. I knew that if I said this, it would open up a full discussion and they'd want to unpack their stuff with me and yada, yada, yada. And in that moment, I was like, the meter is off. I'm exhausted. I just don't want to, I don't have the bandwidth for this. So I looked at them and I said, I'm in HR, which, by the way, is not a lie, although nothing kills a conversation more than telling someone you do HR for a living. I am in HR. I speak to companies around the world about talent management and human resources and how do we create teams that are rooted in authenticity and belonging. But my sister looked at me afterwards and she's like, why did you do that? Like, what was that about? And I said to her, it's true. I do HR for a living. My authentic self would have been to like, just give the full enchilada and dig deep and like get into the, but my adapted self said, no, not this moment. I'm going to adjust and adapt my needs. Or my parents, for example, from Indian culture, really indirect. I'm super direct as a communicator. I adapt all the time because I know it will ruffle their feathers and it serves me too. I don't want their feathers to be ruffled. On the other hand, so I do adapt a lot. On the other hand, sometimes I'm like, no, you need my directness.
Right.
And you need my authentic self to shine here. Why? Because I need it. It's important for me to do. The important thing to take away with the three selves framework is this. It's important for all of us to be mindful of what's happening in any situation, which of the selves is showing up. Try your best to push out of the performing self adapt wherever you want to and need to, and then do your best to show up as the good side of your authentic self. The bad and the ugly, we're adapting on. We don't want our bad and ugly. Like, for example, if you're a yeller, you have anger management problems, you're racist, your authentic self is racist. I would say to you, no, not the bad and ugly. In our interactions, personal interactions, work interactions, we adapt on the bad and ugly. Bring your good, your best authentic self side to interactions as much as possible.
Amazing. We spend so much time twisting ourselves in knots about unimportant things. And we just talked about how hideous, I'll use the word hideous, because I literally looked hideous. I mean, I not only had a tomato red face and like crazy witch hair and foggy glasses and bad breath and impacted sinuses and probably throwing in a camel toe in there too. I didn't have anything tied around my waist. But not giving a shit about that is very liberating, because otherwise I'd be embarrassed by my own existence walking down the sidewalk. And I would twist myself in knots, worrying about what do I look like and how red is my face? Is my face coming down? And maybe I should go back to the hotel and take a shower and get this makeup off my face and blow my nose before I get a cup of coffee. And all of that energy, twisting myself around what other people may be thinking, rather than just being okay, not giving a shit. It's so liberating. And I think about that example of for how long I was willing to twist myself into little spaces that didn't fit, and how painful it can be when you hide who you are, when you're embarrassed about what you look like, when you worry about what other people think about what you're wearing. And yet it's also the flip side is when you give a shit about the right things, twisting yourself into spaces like a small tent is an act of joy because it's aligned with what you value. I didn't give a shit how small that little hole was. I had to army crawl my ass in there in order to get in. And then I had to swirl around like a centipede to curl up in there like a little ball, because it was so aligned with my values of wanting to serve, of wanting to bring fun, of wanting to demonstrate something, which was enthusiasm and surprise and celebration and not giving a shit, like being willing to do that kind of stuff. And so, as we kind of continue to go deeper in all these examples of how I'm oblivious at times and how I've worked actually really hard to get to this point of acceptance and this point of focusing on caring about things that I value and trying to completely disregard aspects of life that I just don't give a shit about. That visual of the tent and why it's important to twist yourself when it's about your values versus twisting yourself when it's not, that's really helpful to see. Did I do anything else that day?
Probably.
Probably is probably the right answer, but I don't have any specifics.
Me neither.
I do. Botox.
Oh my gosh.
So I got Botox, everybody, in my jaw joint, and I've been going to the same dermatologist for over a decade. I love her. I trust her. She's sensational, and I've been having tremendous pain in my jaw, grinding, trouble eating, and both my primary and my dermatologist was like, you got to get Botox in your jaw. And when she felt my jaw, she's like, holy shit, that's a tense muscle. You're going to have a little extra. And I'm like, okay, as long as you make the pain go away. And she said, well, it could impact your smile. I'm like, I don't care. I can't eat at this point. Just take the pain away. Well, she shot me up. And let me tell you something. It impacted my smile. I look like taking a shit when I have a smile. And this is something that I am self-conscious about. So all week long, as we're in Los Angeles and we did a bunch of interviews, I'm having to really try to manage that my lips are curling up, because if I do a closed smile, try to lip smile like you keep your mouth smiled, my lips suck in like our body language expert warned us about. What's that called? A lip
roll.
A lip roll. I do a lip roll and it looks like I'm frowning. And then if I try to do a big toothy smile, I look like I'm grinding out of shit. Like I'm like, clenching. And so I had to tell every single expert we had. Now, look, I'm going to give a kissy face in this because if I try to give you a smile, I'm going to look like I'm growling at you. And so I now have a week's worth of photos from both graduation week and the podcast where I'm kissing experts and kissing in the air, and I look completely ridiculous. But at least I can chew food, and the pain has gone away, but I'm never getting Botox in my jaw again.
But right now, you don't give a shit.
I don't, but it bothers me a little, but I'm trying to direct my attention away from how I look and just go, Mel, it looks like shit, but whatever. What was the CNN story?
Exactly what you said. Can I read to you what some people said to you on CNN?
Wait, you have it?
I do.
Oh, my God. She went back in time.
I think a lot of it you remembered, but this is pretty brutal. I have 4 outstanding comments. Let's say that. Your neck is saggy, just like your opinions. It's funny now, but you were probably like, when you got that, right? Like that was probably
really hurt in the beginning.
Yeah, probably
it
hurt.
Sure did.
You should go back to the hole you crawled out of.
It was a deep hole.
Now we know you're an expert on crawling
Out of
into
holes.
small spaces. Yes.
Yep.
Why is someone so ugly on television?
Ouch.
Nice.
Because I'm smarter than you, fuckface.
Okay. The last one. How does a moron like you have a law degree?
I cheated. That's how
That's how to not give a shit.
Well, you know how I learned how to not give a shit is I started to visualize. Empathy helps a lot. So, couple things on other people's opinions. Number one, let's just take a minute and zoom out and have some perspective and imagine what is the life of a person who is sitting on their phone, watching TV nonstop, sounding off at pundits online. What does their life actually look like? I would imagine hypertension. I would imagine a lot of negativity. I'm going to throw in a little alcohol or drug abuse. Probably a small circle of friends. Not getting a lot of sex, I would imagine. Perhaps living in your parents' basement. I would think your bills are piled sky high if that's how you're spending your time. If you truly spend time sounding off at strangers online, your life sucks. Mm-hmm. And so feeling sorry for somebody that cuts you off in traffic, or even like the mean girls. Mean girls are shitty people. You know how insecure they are? If you need a fucking purse and a designer whatever in order to have high self-esteem, you are really fucking insecure. And so I kind of just look at people that are critical of other people, even though I'm being critical of other people, you know, for the sake of humor, with a lot of sympathy. Like, wow, must really suck for you to watch TV and feel so offended or triggered by what I'm saying that you are taking time and energy to not only write about it, but to spread negativity. That's a really awful place to live your life. I hope you find a good therapist at some point and you get the healing you deserve. And so kind of understanding the greater context and not making it about you. Like, I really mean that. Like, I think about like lots of experiences of just mean cliques of people and how they look down on other people. And I literally say to myself, I would hate to be part of that friend group. And one rule of thumb that I think about a lot is this. Like, I think small minds talk about other people. And really cool, big, creative minds talk about ideas. They talk about things. They talk about the future. And that's what I'm interested in. And so when you kind of make it not so personal, that helps a lot. Mm. And when you elevate yourself above the kind of pettiness and the criticism and the negativity that other people might throw at you, it helps me rise above it. And the truth is, you know, there are days I look like shit. And there are days that I probably look like I shouldn't be on TV. And you know what? I don't give a shit. So it helps a lot. It helps a lot because it's mentally healthy to be able to detach. And a lot of your mental health struggles, whether it's anxiety or disconnection or paranoia, it's all a result in many, many, many cases of you being way too concerned about shit out of your control and way too focused on stories that you're telling yourself that aren't even true. And so if anybody's out there gossiping about me, you need to get better hobbies. You really do. If, you know, you're looking down on other people, or notice the next time you go into a social setting and notice how much time is spent talking about people who aren't there. If that's what's happening in your social setting and it's not a structured conversation around you seeking advice about a situation, which is very different than gossiping. You can seek advice about a situation with another person in your personal life, in your family, or in business, and not have it be gossiping. But if you're engaged in constant banter about other people who aren't present, you need bigger goals. You need to do more with your life, and you need to assess, like, who you're hanging out with, because when they gossip with you, they're going to gossip about you when you leave. That's what those kind of people do. And so it helps to not gossip yourself, because I think gossip is one of those things that you also start giving a shit about things that don't matter. Like, because gossiping is caring about shit that doesn't matter. And I don't think very successful people or accomplished artists or the greatest entrepreneurs are wasting time giving a shit about gossiping about other people. And I used to be a big gossiper. I can say this with certainty because I used to be that insecure, desperate, clingy, anxious, competitive bitch. And I'm not that person anymore. And gossiping was a big thing in my 20s. It is not part of my life anymore at all. How do you not give a shit? And these are just 4 random things that I just tried to distill down because I want to give you a takeaway. This shows you a little behind the scenes. It allows me to show you more of my personality and have a fun way of having you meet Cameron, one of our producers, and Jesse, who runs video and production here for the podcast, and Christine, our COO and CFO, who did not want to be on camera. And I'm proud of just like, fuck it, I don't give a shit. I'm just going to jump on, even though this is out of my comfort zone. And Amy, who's, you know, one of our senior team members and producers here. But I'm like, I got to figure out like what's something you guys can grab onto. Okay. So the first one is rule number 1 for how to stop giving a shit about things that don't matter. Rule number 1, try giving a shit about everything and see how it feels. I'm dead serious about this. I know it sounds stupid, but why not worry about what shoes you're wearing? Worry about what everybody's thinking. Worry about what your boss is doing. Worry about what's going to happen next week. And then stop and ask yourself, is that working for you? Does it really work for you to lie in bed at night and worry about what your friends are doing? Does it really work for you to scroll through social media and worry about the weight you've gained or worried about this? Does it really work for you to obsess about what outfit you're going to put on 7 different times before you leave the house? Does it really work for you to worry about the fact that your makeup is running and you just drop the mask? Like, that's the point of this. Because if worrying about everything and giving a shit about all this stupid stuff actually worked, you'd be happier. You'd feel more secure. You'd have more time because you would work. But it doesn't work. It is so liberating when you realize that, my God, I'm robbing my own energy and my own focus and my own confidence by worrying about so much shit that doesn't matter. Stop it. Stop it. And if you can't stop it, I would just goose it, man. I would step on the accelerator and I would worry about every damn thing and then ask yourself, is this really helping me? Because it doesn't help you to put your hand on a hot stove. That's why you don't do it every day. That's rule number 1. Rule number 2, this kind of goes back to the stuff we talked about with CNN and kind of zooming out and visualizing who actually is criticizing people online. I mean, come on now. Let's show some empathy. So rule number 2 for me that has helped me really stop obsessing about what other people are thinking or other people's reactions is I've come to believe that almost everybody you meet is at about the emotional maturity of somewhere between 8 and 12. I think that's where most people get stuck. Most people's disappointment is an 8-year-old throwing a tantrum. Most people being mad at you is about as long as an 11-year-old is mad at you. And we conflate adults with adult maturity when it comes to their emotional reactions, and 99% of the population does not have it. And so if you can kind of imagine your boss as an 8-year-old, like I think about the guy that we were meeting with at Audible, great guy. I freaking love him. I hope we do a ton of business together. But I think about him as like a cool kid, you know, who's playing games and video games and super innovative and super smart. And it allows me to just relate to him on that human level instead of trying to do that gamesmanship and bad boss and I'm going to get the deal done. No. Think about everybody as between the emotional maturity of 8 to 12, and you'll worry a lot less about how they react. Now, rule number 3 is incredibly important, and I want to thank my team for helping me distill this down because I think this is super, super, super important. Rule number 3 is when it comes to not giving a shit, there is a time and a place for it, okay? And I'm going to take this even further. There is a time for really important standards and being rigid about following them, and a time to amplify your self-expression. And I'm going to give you a tool in just a minute for how you can really use this. In fact, no, I'm going to give you the tool now because I think it'll make more sense. Think about a seesaw, you know, that teeter-totter thing. It's a balance. And so in certain environments, like maybe when you go home, home still feels like the same operating procedures as when you were 8 years old. And so maybe you've been really putting more weight on the side of the way things have always been. And you've really not been giving a shit about your self-expression. The opportunity here is to see where in your life you have stopped being you. You have started giving a shit about things that don't align with your value, that suffocate you, that make you feel like you can't be you. That is not a place that you should be. Those are not relationships you should be in. But you got to think about this kind of like a seesaw. Where in your life are things out of balance and you're starting to give a shit and put weight into things that no longer align with you? And where can you bring things more into balance so that you can be yourself, you can be self-expressed, and you can do so without offending people around you, without you violating corporate HR policies? So we were talking a lot about open-toed shoes. And if I were walking into JP Morgan to close a massive, e-learning, corporate training deal, I probably would not have worn my Valentino espadrilles despite how much they cost. I probably would have worn something else, or at least I would have gotten a fucking manicure, okay? Why? Because there is a time and a place to be cavalier. Your job is a place to pay attention to standards. Why? Because they're paying you to do something. A job, I hope it's fun. I hope you're part of a culture and you have a sense of belonging and you feel appreciated. But the bottom line is you're there because you're getting paid to do something, which means you should care more about the standards and the culture and the operating procedures than you might in your day-to-day life. Why? Because you are making an exchange for money. But I have one giant caveat when it comes to talking about standards in the workplace, and I want to take this opportunity to have a conversation with you about it because it is incredibly important. It is very real. It's very real in work. It's very real in life in general, and it impacts people's ability to be fully, authentically their truest selves. See, there are a lot of standards, especially in the workplace, where discrimination and bias is very real, and it impacts people's ability to be themselves. And as a white woman, I have the privilege of never having to deal with that. I'll give you an example. So I have a bunch of black female friends who do not feel comfortable wearing their natural hair at work. And it's not just anecdotal. There is incredible research documenting this. So a recent study from Michigan State, for example, confirms that 80% of black women feel that they need to switch their hairstyle in order to align with more conservative work standards. And a recent study from Duke has proven that Black women with natural hairstyles, like an afro or twists or braids, less likely to land a job interview than a white woman like me or a Black woman with straightened hair. I mean, that just makes me want to cry. And here I am talking about open-toed shoes, and Black women have to worry about their hair and being who they are. That is so shitty. And that's why I wanted to take an opportunity and why I think it's so important to call out this type of bias. And that's why I'm doing it right now. So I want to acknowledge that whether it's your gender identity or your religion or your race or your sexual orientation or a disability that you have, I want to acknowledge that how you manage this balance that I'm talking about between self-expression and being your authentic, full self, and the very real bias and discrimination that exist in social and workplace norms, that is a deeply personal decision and balancing act that you got to make every single day. And it's easy for me to say, hey, hiding who you are is never okay, because it's true. I don't want you to ever hide who you are. But I just felt it was important that I acknowledge that it's easy to say, but it's not that easy to do. So let me kind of layer that into this rule number 3 that we're talking about, which is there's a time and a place for self-expression. It is up to you to decide what you value most in any situation. When you think about that seesaw between standards and societal or workplace norms versus your self-expression and you being you. But here's what I do know. I hope that you find the courage to choose your values and to choose being yourself as often as you can. And that brings me to the 4th rule. The 4th rule for how to learn how to give a shit about what matters and not care about what doesn't. The 4th rule is you go first. You go first. Every single human being that you encounter is trapped in some sort of rule they think they should be following. Everybody. And the rule, if you want to start giving a shit about what really matters, is you go first. You be the one that shows up with espadrilles. You be the one that says, I'll pull on that spacesuit and climb into that thing. You be the one that brings the fun. And what I've found over and over and over again, and I think, Christine, you'll be able to say, yep, it's true, is that by being willing to put the real me, especially the hideous me, the moments where I'm crying, the moments where my makeup is running, the moments where the dog has just barfed all over something, the moments where I've just left a gym class where I've pulled a calf muscle and I'm still panting and my eyes are bloodshot and my face is beet red, and I literally look at myself in the selfie and I say, how does Christopher Robbins wake up next to this every single morning with a smile on his face? Because you, woman, are ugly. And then I hit play. My willingness to do that, my willingness to go first, to drop the mask, the filter, to just put it out there, it's liberating for people. I mean, people come up to me more often when I look like shit. And I say, yeah, I'm happy to take a selfie. They're like, really? Like shocked that I would want to actually take a selfie looking like that. And then somebody perfectly made up, like, well, let me fix my hair. And I'm like, are you kidding? Look at me. I look like a labradoodle that just ran a marathon. I mean, give me a break. Get the selfie up here. Let's go. I'm going to make a kissy face because my jaw is frozen and it makes it look like I'm taking a shit when I try to smile. But what do you see, Christine, in the you go first?
And then you go first? Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think it's something that really connects with people when they meet you, of just feeling like they're running into a friend that they, have seen from afar. And I think that there's something very special about that, and it's a true connection. And then something I would just add, as somebody who's known you for a long time, 18 years at this point, of you have always been exactly the same person. And so it's weird that when we run into people and people are super excited to see you just because I've known you for so long, but that it's a sincere connection. for sure. And the other thing I would say is that I've never known you to make a negative comment about anyone else's appearance, how anyone else is dressed. Like, you're not, I don't think that's something that you process or are connected to. And I think it's because you freed yourself of those constraints that I don't even know that it's something that you notice. And I think that's quite admirable. And I think that's also something to share of, like, once you stop caring about those things, you'll stop paying attention to them in other people too. And it makes it better for everyone.
That's a huge, profound point, because I've heard other people, Christine, make this point where they go, when other people judge you, it's about them. It's not about you. But I think you just illustrated why. Because I don't ever critically judge what anybody else looks like or what they're wearing, because you're right. I don't judge myself for what I'm wearing. I mean, I can laugh at myself. I have humanity and humor about it, but I'm not actually very critical of myself. And I think if you can eradicate that in yourself, it's true. You don't actually criticize other people. It does begin with how you treat yourself. And this also then reinforces what I'm saying about empathy. All those people that you're trying to be friends with that are competitive, or they're like the high-end group, or they're the fancy people, and you feel that criticism, they're deeply critical of themselves. And that's the circle that you're chasing. Like, you got to get right with you. And it's an interesting topic, how to not give a shit about, stuff, because it sounds like a throwaway topic. But I think at the core of a great life, it's really one of the most important skills that you can actually learn, because what you're doing is you're really giving a shit about your values, and you're putting your attention and your mindset and your effort toward what you value, and you're spending less and less time and energy on things that you don't. I love that famous Nipsey Hussle quote. If you look at the people in your circle and you don't get inspired, then you don't have a circle, you have a cage. And I'm going to add to that quote. If you look at the people in your circle and you can't be yourself, then you don't have a circle. You are in a cage. And you got to be very careful about this, because here's what I've realized over and over and over again in my own life. It's that my own behavior and my insecurities are almost always what put me and keep me in that cage. And that brings me to a final story I want to share with you from last week. It's a story about our daughter, Kendall, and how insecurities can put you in a cage. If you follow me on social media, you're probably aware that our daughter graduated from USC last week, and she was given the honor of singing the national anthem at the 140th commencement ceremonies for the University of Southern California. So we were there. It was an unbelievable moment to watch our daughter sing the national anthem a cappella in front of 20,000 fellow graduates and their families. So we're talking at least 50,000 people there as she was singing. And one of the coolest things is, as she was singing the national anthem and as the song starts to build, you hear the crowd getting louder and louder. And you can also hear her just coming into the fullest, most authentic version of who she is. Just take a listen to this moment.
Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we hailed at the twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight and the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming, and the rocket's red glare, the bombs bursting in air,
that moment will probably be one of those moments that flashes before my eyes on my deathbed, like a core memory. But that's not the point of the story. The point of the story is this. 24 hours after that moment, I asked her, so Ken, what was the most surprising thing that's happened since you sang the national anthem yesterday? And she said this. I didn't realize that 99% of my friends have never heard me sing. I'm like, what? She said, yeah. She said, hearing me sing at graduation was the first time in 4 years of knowing me that they had ever heard my voice. Now, keep in mind, she is a popular music major. For 4 years, she has been performing in college. And just stop and consider that 99% of her friends over the past 4 years have never heard her sing. Why? Because of her insecurities. See, she gave a shit about what people would think about her singing. And if you look at her social media, for the last 4 years, there was only one post on her Instagram account. And that one post was of her singing. But that's it. Now, this is her deepest passion. Her standing before people and singing and sharing herself, this is the truest form of her self-expression. And yet, she put herself in a cage because of her insecurities. That's so sad. And I know you're doing it too. That in some area of your life, you are so concerned about what other people might think that you're not sharing your full self. That's what it means to put yourself in a cage. Now, here's the good news. The door to that cage, it's wide open. And it always has been. I hope this episode has inspired you to open your wings and express yourself, your full self. Because when you drop those insecurities and you stop caring so much about it, and you allow yourself to just be you, you, my friend, will set yourself free. We are going to talk about the 3 things that you need to accept about other people. These are things I need to accept too. These are not easy things to accept, but trust me, when you accept these truths, the 3 truths about other people, it's going to make your life easier. And I'm excited to talk to you about this topic because it's very clear based on the number of questions that you have submitted at melrobbins.com about other people. Mel, how do I get my spouse to change? Mel, how do I get my kid to change? Mel, how do I inspire my team? Mel, what do I do about this person over there and that person over here? Or there's a different version of this question you've been asking too, which is, as I'm changing, why are my family not that supportive? Why is it that as I make big changes in my life, like I'm not getting the support that I deserve? Why is the people around me not joining in on all these positive changes I'm making that are inspired by this Mel Robbins podcast thing? Well, I'll tell you what, we're going to handle that today because it's clear that you need more advice, you need more inspiration, and you need more Mel Robbins on this topic about how to deal with other people. And there's something else. I need more of something. I need more of you. And so what you're going to hear today is you're going to hear listeners of the Mel Robbins podcast asking questions on this topic. And we are going to jump in and unpack these 3 truths that you got to accept, I got to accept about other people. Now, before I tell you the 3 truths, I just want to say one other thing. I have been absolutely floored by your response to this show. And I want to thank you. I want to thank you for spending your time with me. And I also want to thank you for sharing this with the people in your life. I was in California the other day and I was ordering a sandwich at a deli. And this woman who made my sandwich, as she handed me over, the little sandwich wrapped in the white after they put the little sticker on it, she leans forward and she says, I didn't want to say anything, but I've been listening to your podcast. My sister shared an episode with me, and I just want to tell you something. I immigrated here as a little girl from Africa, and I feel like what I'm learning on this podcast She was whispering. I don't know if she didn't want her colleagues to hear or her boss. Like, I didn't know why she was whispering, but she's whispering. And she had these big glasses on just like me. And she said, but I feel like what I'm learning on this podcast, it's helping me sprout wings so I can fly and reach heights that I've always dreamt of. And I want to tell you, that is a shared success. You are helping me do that. Together, we are creating a positive ripple effect around the world. Together, we are inspiring people to dream bigger, to face obstacles and challenges, and most importantly, to feel a little less alone. And so I just want to thank you. I want to thank you for your time. I want to thank you for sharing these episodes with your friends, with your family. I want to thank you for posting it on social media, because you just never know how sharing this stuff is going to change somebody's life. And I'm telling you right now, you are part of a force for good in this world that is empowering other people. And that's why I want you to know the 3 things that you have to accept about other people. Okay? And let me tell them to you right now. And then as we go through the questions, I am going to unpack these at a deeper level and explain to you that these truths, they're there no matter what issue you are dealing with when it comes to other people. So truth number 1, if they wanted to, they would. Truth number 2, you can't make somebody else change. You can make them dinner, you can make them laugh, but you cannot make someone else change. And number 3, stop being mad that people aren't who you want them to be. Those are the 3 truths. They are hard to accept, but when you do, they make your life easier. And as we go through these questions one by one, and I not only give you more inspiration, more advice, more research about the specific issues in each question, I'm going to come back to these 3 truths over and over and over again and show you how accepting these 3 truths and applying them to all your relationships, it actually makes your life easier. And it's also easier on other people, because what you're going to find out is because they apply not only to other people, but they also apply to you and me. So let's just take rule number 1. If they wanted to, they would. Now, that kind of stings when you think about other people. When you think about folks in your life that, boy, I wish they'd make an effort. I wish they'd show up. I wish they'd reach out. I wish they'd try a little bit harder. I wish they'd get healthier. I wish they'd... Yeah, if they wanted to, they would. But guess what? It also applies to you. There are people in your life that wish you would make an effort, that wish you would change some aspect about you. And the truth about all of us is we do the things we feel like doing. And when it matters to you, you do it. And it is hard to accept the fact that if you want to know where somebody stands on an issue, watch their actions. That tells you exactly what they want to do and what they don't want to do. Do not listen to their words, because it's easy to say, yes, no, I do this, I'll do that, to talk the talk, but talk is cheap. And so it is hard to accept that if they wanted to, they would. And the truth about you is, if you wanted to, you would. And so I wanted to kind of like say this swings both ways. Everything that we're going to talk about is true about other people, and it's also true about you. And I like reminding both of us that, because it gives you a level of humility and a little bit more compassion when you get into situations with people where they're not doing what you want them to do. That brings me to our first question from Lisa.
Hi, Mel. My name is Lisa, and I have a question for you. Mel, I am currently struggling with being a more tolerant person. I struggle with accepting others and their bullshit. We all have bullshit, and we all have to carry it, deal with it, and unload it. Don't get me wrong. I have worked on myself for years, trying to be better and do better. But damn, I want to scream sometimes. Just be better. I have had to deal with so much in life, but I've always wanted more for myself and my family, regardless of the shit that life serves up. Meeting people where they are in life is so important. I know and understand this, but my patience is tried when people wallow. Any advice, Mel?
Okay, I love this question. And I'm sure you can relate to it as much as I can relate to it. And before I dig into this, I want to divide Lisa's questions into two different topics, okay? So the first topic is her frustration that people don't want to do better. That's topic number one. Topic number two is how to deal with what's really irritating, which is people who wallow was her word. I say marinate, commiserate, just absolutely at some level love their bullshit. You know those people. Something's always wrong. They're always complaining. The weather's always bad, or they're always unhealthy. They're like, you know, that kind of person. So let's start with the first part of that, which is this frustration that you hear in Lisa's voice. I just want them to do better. I've done better. There's almost like an arrogance and a judgment in that, right? That, oh, well, if I've fixed myself, you should fix yourself. If I can do this, then you should do this. And to me, that's toxic positivity. Just assuming that because you've done it, that somebody else should. And I'm emphasizing the word should, because should holds judgment. If you have the perspective that if I've done it, then you could do it too, that's inspiration. That's helping somebody. And so what you want to make sure that you're doing is that if you're frustrated, that you're coming from a place of love and coming from a place of wanting to help somebody, rather than coming from a place of judgment, of the should, of the, you're not doing this, you're not doing that. Because we've all been on the receiving end of that, right? Where somebody's beaten you down because they've done something and they think you should do something. I can give you a really good example of this because I think there's a big difference of somebody being capable of doing something and somebody not being capable yet. As a person that is new to personal development, and I'm talking about myself, I've only known about personal development for just over 10 years. I am new to therapy. I mean, I've been engaged in therapy for a long time, but I feel like it takes a while to understand that there are certain things that a lot of people have never even thought about or been taught. I mean, I didn't bump into a lot of the topics that I'm talking about right now until I was in my mid-40s. For example, I'll give you one. I didn't truly understand trauma. When I heard the word trauma, I thought that was something that people that served in the military had. I thought that you had to be on a tour of duty and see absolutely something horrific, or be somewhere where there's extreme violence, or be the victim of a really violent crime. I did not realize that there's big T trauma and there's little t trauma. I didn't realize that growing up in a household where you experience emotional abuse, or you have parents that are distant or mismatched, or maybe you experienced a childhood where there was a lot of poverty or there was discrimination. These are all forms of trauma. I had no idea. And so there are people in your life that would love to change, but they can't right now because they don't even understand that they are trapped in some kind of a trauma pattern. They're not aware of it. There are people in your life that would love to have the level of fitness that you have, love to have the level of discipline that you have, but they're not capable of it right now because they maybe are struggling with depression, or maybe they don't have the family structure around them that is supportive that you have, or maybe they didn't have the experiences that you've had in your life that have allowed you to develop the habits that you've had. And so I think it's really important when you start to feel yourself frustrated with other people to check your ego and to ask yourself, well, am I in the lane of wanting someone to better themselves because I care about them and I see potential in them? Or am I in the other side of this, which is I'm being really judgy? That's where my frustration is coming from. And I'm assuming that somebody's got the resources and the ability and the support and the knowledge and all of the, motivation that you need in order to get started. And so I think it's super important, step one, that when you feel that frustration, when you feel yourself getting hooked, that you check yourself at the door. Do I want them to do this because I care about them, or am I judging them and I think that they should do this because I think that what they're, when you get into that lane and you know it, you've got to take a breath. You got to recognize that you're coming from superiority. And I want you to step to the other side, because understanding is an act of love. Being compassionate is an act of love. Being tolerant of where somebody is an act of love. I'm going to give you an example from my own life. So just this morning, Chris yelled at me. That's my husband. And I'm kind of embarrassed to admit what happened to you. Because boy, oh boy, I will tell you, if Chris heard Lisa's question, he would say, I'm struggling with being more tolerant of my wife, Mel. And so here's what happened. Our new puppy, Homie, is going to go to a puppy class. And in order to go to this puppy training class on Wednesday, he needs to be up to date on his vaccines, right? No problem. Because when we got our puppy, when he was 9 weeks old, I took him to the vet. He got all of his shots at week 12, and that was great. I'm a responsible pet owner. This is fantastic. Then all of a sudden the podcast launched, and I've been gone. So Chris looks at me this morning and says, why didn't you tell me that Homie is not up to date with his vaccines? I'm like, what are you talking about? I took him when we first got him. He said, Mel, that was when he was 12 weeks old. He's almost 20 weeks old, Mel. He's missed 2 veterinarian appointments. He is 8 weeks late on getting his vaccinations. I'm laughing because I feel so bad. And I said, well, and he's like, didn't you make follow-up appointments? I said, yes. Where's his folder? You know, that came with him when we got him as a puppy. I borrowed a Sharpie from the vet when I was checking out, and I wrote the dates in there. And sure enough, we got the folder out, and there were the 2 dates. We have missed both of those appointments. I never put them in the calendar. Chris took the folder, and this is a man who never gets upset. He took that folder, you guys. He slammed it shut. He slammed it against his desk. He stood up. He didn't even wheel around on his chair. He stood up. The chair rolled away, and he said, Mel, don't give me this ADHD shit. I know you have a lot going on, but you have a living and breathing animal that you are supposed to be taking care of. This is not acceptable. You have to do better. And there's the dog barking on cue. Apparently he agrees. I can't make this up. Everybody hates me right now. Yeah, and and here's the thing, like I know that Chris wanted to scream. Chris did scream at me, just be better. And I know that I'm now going to get flooded with comments and emails about this. I'm okay with that. I know I'm going to get a lot of advice about ADHD. I know I'm going to get advice about supplements. Now that you're hearing this story, I'm going to get a lot of you that think I'm a terrible pet owner. I'm cool with that. This is what actually happened this morning. And here's what I had to say to Chris. I want to do better. I don't think I can right now. I am so busy at work. I do not have an assistant. I am terrible with the calendars. I'm actually impressed that I wrote the dates down that they gave to me. I thought I put them in the calendar, Chris. But my brain is dropping balls left and right. And so the reason why I'm telling you this story is I'm not letting myself off the hook. I am motivated to try to figure out how to improve the systems that I have and improve the level of support that I have, because I don't want to be dropping these balls. Chris doesn't need to get frustrated at me for me to feel like shit about this. Of course I want to do better. But this is one of those instances where my brain doesn't work like his. I can't just, like, Chris is Mr. Foundational Operations guy. Chris methodically sits and organizes and can sit still. He's really good with tech and with Excel spreadsheets. I am the opposite. I am absolutely the opposite. And so the reason why I'm telling you this story is because I guarantee you have somebody in your life that, my gosh, you just want to bang your head against the wall. And you can tell yourself if they wanted to, they would. And that's true for some things. It is true. It's true for whether or not people want to show up at an event. It's true for whether or not people reach out to you. It's true for whether or not people make an effort. It's true for whether or not people are engaging in healthy habits. If they wanted to, they would. And then there are some times that it's really important in your life, in order to manage your own frustration, to be a little bit more empathetic. That if they could, they would. And I'll tell you, I am motivated to get the support that I need so that I do not drop balls like this, because I want to do better. And having Chris yell at me, it was actually kind of helpful this morning, because it just allowed him to be frustrated. It allowed me to see that this really is a big deal, because he keeps picking up the slack on my behalf. And that's not a great solution either. And so here's kind of where the takeaway is on that. At the end of the day, it's about managing your energy. And when you allow somebody else's consistent behavior, I'm not talking about stuff where people are breaking the laws or they're addicted to something, or, something that's super, super destructive. But I've been married to Chris for 26 years, and I have been this forgetful. I've been this forgetful and this bad the entire time we have been together. This is not new Mel Robbins. I am definitely overwhelmed with the launch of this podcast and the move to Vermont and all the travel recently and not having an assistant right now. But this is standard. I have wanted to change this my whole life, and I'm trying, man. And a little bit of empathy and support goes a long way, because if you don't give that to the people in your life, if you're not more tolerant of the things that they're not capable of, they're just going to feel demoralized and ashamed. And so, yes, if they wanted to, they would. And make sure that if it's a situation where they can't really, or it's really hard for them, that you bring a little bit more empathy, because that's going to help them. The other thing is, let's go to number 2. You can't make someone else change. So I think this is super important, because if you get as frustrated as Lisa's getting, you can feel like Chris is, you can't make someone change. You just can't do it. Yes, you can make them dinner. You can make somebody laugh. You can make requests. You cannot make someone change. And so I'm going to tackle this in 2 ways. Do you know that Chris and I have come back to this issue of Mel's forgetfulness over and over and over and over again? And I'd say about 15 years ago, we made a decision, because I am terrible with logistics and I am notorious at dropping balls, and I am the queen of good intention. I am the queen of good intentions, and I often lack the follow through. And I'm talking simple stuff, like literally, here's another example. We are going to a holiday party. I think it's on the 17th of the month. And a friend of mine texted me and said, "Are you guys going to this party?" I said, "Yes." She said, "Great. We're going to have people over for cocktails first." I said, "Great." Given that Chris and I had just fought about the dropping of the ball of the veterinarian appointment, I immediately screenshotted her text and sent it to my husband, Chris, and said, "Honey, I don't want to forget to write this in the calendar, so I'm telling you so that you can make sure that we know and remember to go to this." That is what our system has been forever. So what's interesting is that you've got 2 choices when it comes to somebody and their behavior. The rule you need to remember is you can't make them change, which means you either have to stop trying to make them change, or you need to figure out how to show up differently to make up for what they're doing wrong, or to support them in an entirely new way. And so we already had a solution for the fact that this is an issue that I cannot change. And the solution is Chris is the point person for all things. If you want us to show up, go to Chris. If you need a check written, go to Chris. If you need to make sure that it's in the calendar, go to Chris. If the kids need a whatever it's called, like you know how kids always have that exam that they need before they go to sports? What's that called? Like the annual wellness check. Thank you. You know how kids need an annual wellness check? Guess when Mel Robbins realizes they do? The day it's due. That's right. So if you do not want to have that kind of emergency, go to Chris. But what you have to accept in your life is that you're not going to make someone else change. I'm super motivated to be better, but Chris can't make me do it. I have to be the one to do it. And so you know what you're doing when you put energy into being frustrated about other people who either won't or can't make that change you want them to make? You're just burning energy. Imagine if you took all that energy that you're frustrated at other people and you just poured that energy in a positive direction to make your own life better. I often think about how many years of my life I have wasted being frustrated with other people. Truly. Wishing they would change, wanting them to change, trying to make them change. I've tried manipulating people. I've tried bribing people. I've tried, I'm talking with like a box of Legos or something. I've tried motivating people. I've tried inspiring people. The fact of the matter is, you can do all those things. But if somebody doesn't want to, they won't. If somebody can't, then they won't. So, yes, make them dinner. Yes, make them laugh. Yes, try to be compassionate and understanding. But all of that energy and frustration that you can hear in Lisa, I want to scream sometimes. I'm sure you do, because you're trying to make them change. That's why you're frustrated. And that brings me to the third rule. You got to stop being mad at people for not being who you want them to be. I will never be an accountant. I will never be somebody who is OCD detail-oriented. That's not me. My genius is in being creative. It's in connecting with people. It's, flying by the seat of my pants. That's my genius. And somehow Chris and I have made it work for 26 years. And I think it has to do with the fact that we are 99% compassionate, understanding, and supportive of one another. And then there's those 1% moments that happen today over me being a dumbass about the new puppy. And of course, I feel terrible about it, but I will never be Susie Q with the calendar. That's just not who I'm supposed to be in life, and that's okay. But I can be more responsible about getting the support I need so I don't leave other people in breakdown. And we are going to get into boundaries because I know you're already going to, well, what do you do, Melvin? We will get there. But I want to address one other aspect of Lisa's question, and it's this.
Meeting people where they are in life is so important. I know and understand this, but my patience is tried when people wallow. Any advice, Mel?
I'm going to give you a specific tactic for people who wallow. I call this the 6-month rule. The people in your life get 6 months to wallow in anything. They have 6 months to wallow about the divorce. They have 6 months to wallow about the weight they've put on. They have 6 months to wallow about the job they lost or the circumstances or the weather or whatever else. And once the wallowing passes the 6-month mark, you have a boundary to draw. Okay? And this boundary works like a frickin' charm because, number one, if they don't want to, they're not going to change. You're just going to wallow. Number two, you can't make them change, so don't even try. And number three, you got to stop being mad about this person not being a person that you want them to be. But you can draw a boundary. And you want to hear the boundary? It's the 6-month rule. Here's what you say. So-and-so. I'll give you an example from my own life. So I have a friend that got a divorce after a really it was like, one of those divorces is just ugly. Just ugly, ugly, ugly. And the divorce was finalized, okay? This friend of mine, every time I saw her, constantly complaining about the ex and the this and the that and the other thing and the other thing and the other thing. And finally, after 6 months, I looked at her and I said, you are no longer allowed to talk about this in front of me. I have recommended therapists. I have been a good friend. I have given you books to read, all of which you have done nothing about. I am no longer available to be a soundboard for your wallowing because it is clear to me that you don't want to do anything about this. The second that you would like to change this, I am here to support you. I am here to help you, but I am not available for you to stay stuck. I care about you too much. So if you'd like to go complain to somebody else, please do. But you are not allowed to bring this person's name up. You are not allowed to talk about your marriage, your ex-marriage, your ex, any of it. I'm not available for that anymore. And an interesting thing will happen. That person will be mortified. And they probably won't call you for a while because they're still addicted to their wallowing. You're not trying to change them. Isn't that interesting? You're not trying to change them. You didn't say stop wallowing. You said, I'm not available for it. So you know who changed in that relationship? You did. You changed what you're available for. Now, Chris could literally say to me, you're not allowed to take the animals to the vet unless I'm with you. You're not allowed to make travel plans. You're not allowed to respond to invites. He could say that to me and draw a boundary. He's not asking me to change. He's basically changing how he shows up with me, which is basically what he did about 15 years ago. And it solved most of the issues. So I want you to understand that when you understand and you accept these 3 truths about people, if they wanted to, they would, unless they can't. Number 2, you can't change anybody. And number 3, stop being mad at people for not being who you want them to be. You take all the power back. None of this says you can't change. And so when you get frustrated by somebody else complaining, cut off access to the complaining. You're not saying I don't love you. You're actually saying the opposite. You're saying I love you so much that I'm not going to be a part of you staying stuck. And as long as I listen to this garbage come out of your mouth, you are going to be stuck. I'm not here for it. I'm here for your transformation. I am here for you creating a better life. I'm here for you moving on. I'm here for you no longer giving airtime to this asshole that you're divorced to. I am here for your future. I am no longer here for your past. When your friend is ready to change, guess what? They will, because they will want to. Remember, that's rule number 1. If they wanted to, they would. And, one of the things that I want to say before we move on to question number 2 is that I think a lot of us learn that part of a relationship is struggle, that there's conflict, that there's tension, that you've got to have somebody to fight against or push against, that you saw these patterns growing up or they have been patterns in friendships or relationships. And so you're just kind of used to this push-pull. Well, what if I told you that it doesn't have to be that way? That maybe if you're in relationships that feel like a lot of work, that's a sign that the relationships that you're in are no longer working for you. And one of the fastest ways to get rid of the struggle is drop the rope. Now, what does that mean? So think about tug of war. When you are playing a game of tug of war where you're on one side of the rope and, you got other people on the other side of the rope and you're pulling back and forth and it's a lot of effort and pulling, yanking. You want to know the best way to win tug of war? Literally, as somebody goes to yank backwards, let go of the rope. They fall on their ass and then you yank the rope back towards you. Who said that's not fair? Of course that's fair. Letting go of the struggle often makes the struggle go away. And so notice that Lisa's question was, Mel, I'm struggling to be a more tolerant person. And so the way you become more tolerant is accept those 3 things about people. If they wanted to, they would. If they could, they would. Number 2, you can't make them change. Number 3, stop being mad at them for not being who you want. And then you've learned some other things. Doesn't mean you can't change. Doesn't mean you can't draw boundaries. Doesn't mean you can't say, you can do all this stuff you want, but don't do it in front of me. I have another example of that. I have a friend who is dating somebody and she adores him, absolutely adores him, and then confessed to me, but when he goes out with his guy friends, they gamble and he does coke and I'm not down with it. I'm like, don't tell me. Tell him. You're not going to change him, but you can tell him, I got a boundary. Don't you do that around me. That'll make somebody think, because you're following the 3 rules. You're not trying to change them, but you're very clear about what your values are and what's good for you. Not asking. You didn't say don't do that. You said, don't do it around me. Big difference. That makes somebody stop and think, doesn't it? It's going to make somebody question, well, what am I doing? If this person I really care about doesn't want it done around me, maybe I should start thinking about what I want done around me. I like it because it's sneakier and it's the truth and it works with these 3 rules. Hey, it's Mel. Thank you so much for being here. If you enjoyed that video, by God, please subscribe because I don't want you to miss a thing. Thank you so much for being here. We've got so much amazing stuff coming. Thank you so much for sending this stuff to your friends and your family. I love you. We create these videos for you. So make sure you subscribe. Mwah.